So I think we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone, or whatever the time is where you are. Welcome. My name is Guillaume Fontaine. I'm an assistant professor at McGill University and director of the RISE Implementation Science Lab. I'm really delighted today to host this session of the inaugural session of the Global Leaders in Implementation Science seminar series for 2026, which is co-sponsored by McGill University's Ingram School of Nursing and the RISE Lab. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathering virtually from many places, and I'm speaking from Montreal on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. A quick word on the series. Global Leaders in Implementation Science is designed to bring together researchers, practitioners, students, and partners to explore emerging trends, methodological innovations, and practical insights. Some housekeeping for today's session. We will hold questions until the end. You're welcome to post questions in the Q&A section as they come up, and I will curate them at the end. If you're able, please add also your name and affiliation when asking a question so our speaker can place your perspective. We are recording this session and we'll be posting it to our YouTube channel as well. Now it's a real pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today. Professor Susan Michie is Professor of Health Psychology and Director of the Centre for Behaviour Change at University College London. She is also co-director of Behavioural Research UK, and many of you will know Professor Michie's work as foundational to how we conceptualize and operationalize behavior change and implementation. From the behavior change wheel and its COM-B core to major advances in specifying intervention content through the behavior change technique taxonomy, and to more recent work bridging behavioral science and data science through ontology development and AI-enabled evidence synthesis. Her talk today is titled Advancing Behavioral and Implementation Sciences Through Ontologies. In this session, she will show how ontologies can make key concepts more consistent, machine readable, so that evidence can be searched, linked, synthesized, and applied more effectively. Professor Michie, thank you so much for joining us and for opening the 2026 series. The floor is yours. You're welcome to share your screen.
Thank you very much. Is that successful?
Yes, all great, all good.
Excellent. Well, thanks for inviting me, and very honoured to be the first series of what sounds like it will be a very exciting series. This is the Centre for Behaviour Change. On my left there is Professor Fabi Lauren-Catto, who's actually Professor of Behavioural and Implementation Sciences, showing how closely these two are linked together. And we look at bringing different disciplines together and also translating academic knowledge to the outside world. Do join our newsletter if you're interested. So the main messages of this talk is we urgently need to strengthen the science in implementation and in behavioural sciences. And I actually have another talk all about doing this, but I'm just going to, in this talk, just talk about ontologies as a way of doing this. We can do this by more efficient organisation sharing and integration of knowledge. I think a lot of you will realise that a lot of our knowledge is fragmented in different silos of different disciplines, different labs, different topic domains. And this holds us back. The ontologies, probably many of you won't know what ontologies are, and I hope by the end of this talk you will. Basically a framework for representing knowledge using very precise language, a semantic organisation, and precise enough to be computer readable. So we have many problems facing us, but one of them is very well put back in 1902. Science is built up of facts, as a house is built of stones, but accumulation of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones is a house. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the real acceleration of publications in relation to behavioural interventions, but the same is true in implementation science. So, behaviour and implementation sciences are hampered by problems of data and evidence growing faster than we can keep up with. Finding and integrating evidence, since databases are often not linked, and reporting evidence. Evidence is, or people's research is reported very variably, often terms are vague or ambiguous, and often key information is missing. And lack of precision and conceptual clarity. I mean, our own languages are beautifully rich in terms of expression, in terms of nuance, etc. But if we're not using in science precise terms so that we all understand what we're talking about, it really will hold us back. So, first problem, we need better reporting. All aspects of interventions, their mechanisms of action, i.e. their processes of change, and their contexts. So as I said, we want a common language across disciplines and domains. Now, this doesn't mean everybody has to use the same words, but what you do have to do, if you want to be scientific in the way I'm talking about it, is define the term you're using in such a way as it's precise and you can tell how is this related to other terms. The problem is a lot of the terms, because they're so poorly defined, you just don't know what exactly are they, and therefore how do they relate to other things. And then we want these terms to be precise and structured so computers can read them, enabling use of AI to analyze data. If we can't do this, we're really missing out. We're limited in our ability to replicate findings if we can't precisely define what the interventions are. And if we do find evidence of an effective intervention, we're limited in our ability to implement, evaluate, and improve those interventions. And as I said, harness AI for data analysis. Problem 2, we need shared understanding and language for core concepts. So I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but often different terms are used for the same concept, or the same term is used for different concepts. As I said, many are poorly described, and silos I mentioned, and then also there's lack of clarity often between funding agencies as to what implementation science is and how it's operationalized. This is from back in 2008. Well, you will know if things have moved on, but I think we need to do a really good job in making sure that funders are very clear about implementation science. Problem 3, we have too many theories and frameworks. And this means that knowledge is not cumulative. Often there are different but overlapping concepts and terms, unclear purposes, and fragmented rather than integrated. We need more shared language, more knowledge integration, and fewer but better studies and more collaboration. I mean, the main message here is there's huge amounts of research being generated, but we're not doing this in a coordinated and efficient way that can maximize our advance. So came across this, actually. It was Dean Fixon, some of you may know. He and I are on a Lancing Commission today together looking at implementation for global health. And he reminded me of this editorial that he wrote with me, Jeremy Grimshaw, and Martin Eccles, before the days that Martin Eccles became an art student. This is back in 2009, specifying and reporting complex behaviour change interventions, which obviously implementation interventions are, the need for a scientific method. What are we? We're nearly 20 years, 17 years later. So that was interesting to re-find that. And then also, digging back in here, we have 12 years ago, again, work I did with Jeremy towards a common terminology, a simplified framework of interventions to promote and integrate evidence into health practices, systems and policies. And then 9 years ago, an effort was made for a validated, simplified framework of interventions to promote and integrate evidence into health practices, systems and policies, was a working group that I was then part of. So this problem's been recognised for a long time. And in another talk I've got, I identified 12 different frameworks that frequently used in implementation science. But we maybe haven't made as much progress as we could. So, oh yes, I've got it in this talk. Okay, so this was ChatGPT, and I won't go through all of these, but this on the next slide lists 12 that I think most of you will be quite familiar with. So that's this slide and the next slide. Oh dear, sorry. This is, you can't really see this because I forgot to put an animation on here. But anyway, you can, I think, see roughly what they are. And the point here is, as I said before, because these don't relate to each other and use different terms and different concepts, just slicing the cake up in different ways, it really isn't helpful for us. And, you know, we can have lots of different frameworks because these frameworks often have different focuses, trying to do different things. But what we do need to be able to do, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? Those pieces of jigsaw puzzle need to fit together, not be just random ones from different jigsaws that you don't know what to do with. And that's a bit how it feels at the moment. I haven't been that involved in implementation science over the last few years, but I went to, I was just saying earlier to Guillaume that I went to a conference, implementation science in China at the end of last year. First one they'd held, Roman Zhu, who some of you know, headed this, and it was great. I mean, there were 900 delegates in the first ever conference. China does things at scale. Very good science. But I felt at the end of it so depressed by these different frameworks being put up without precision and without knowing exactly what these things are or how they relate to anything else. And I really felt, and that's why I came back from that conference, contacted Dean Fix and Jeremy Grimshaw again and said, like, we've got to do better. So I am going to try and see if I can get a group of people together to do some position statement about how to make implementation science more scientific. What I'm saying here is only part of it on my own sort of take on things. Okay, so you're probably all aware of this really helpful piece of work, which was exactly this, trying to bring things together into a meta framework. And for those of you who are not familiar, it has 4 steps: determining the purpose, first of all, identifying which theories, models and frameworks are potentially relevant for that purpose, evaluating a shortlisted group of them against specific attributes, and then assessing practical considerations within the context of the project. So those are good steps for selecting them, but we need a way of you know, connecting these up at a precise level. So this is where, in my view, ontologies come in. They enhance precision, integration, and automation, and as I said, link knowledge and data and help with communication. So what is an ontology? It's a formal representation of knowledge within a domain, a structured way of organizing concepts within a field and the relationships between them using shared language. So the relationships between concepts is really important. Every concept and relationship has a label that names the concept, the precise definition, which is the essence of it, the unique identifier, so that the computer knows exactly what it is. Here's an example from a colleague of mine. It's about swimming behaviour, not at all relevant to most of you in your professional life. But as you can see, you know, the top level in terms of swimming behaviour, there's equipment and there's a kind of stroke, then there's location. Then each of those have kind of subclasses. These are called classes. So within every single one of these circles, ovals, there will be many, many layers below them. So that just gives you an idea of the sort of structure. Was it last year or the year before? Oh, 2022, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine produces excellent support, Ontologies in the Behavioural Sciences, Accelerating Research and the Spread of Knowledge. Now, I'm talking about behavioural sciences here, but everything I say here applies to implementation science, in my view. And so I'd really recommend having a look at this report. Work I began doing about 10 years ago or so, not that long, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, really was generated by my frustration of being on a national guideline committees and thinking that the kind of questions we want to ask are complex and just can't be answered with any kind of detail that's needed by human beings. And often it would take us 2 to 3 years by the time we translated the question from the minister into something that could be properly addressed, commissioned the systematic reviewing teams, had the draft recommendations tested in the field, etc., etc. By which time, the minister had left, life had moved on. So the kind of complex question, and you'll have seen this in different ways, that we need, whether you're a policymaker or a practitioner or a planner, you need to answer some kind of variant of this question. So when it comes to interventions, what worked, compared with what, for what behaviours, how well, for how long, with whom, what population, in what setting, and why, which is a theoretical question. Now, any of you who've done, systematic literature reviews that aren't automated will know that usually the result of any systematic literature review is small to medium effect with very high heterogeneity. All the important information is in that heterogeneity, because that shows how can somebody move from what's known to a particular setting and a particular group. But that's all lost because the data just isn't big enough to be able to look at these. So I thought, as a result of that and various other experiences, we need to collaborate with computer scientists here and harness AI. Okay, we have to extract all the evidence relevant to any particular question. It struck me that we're missing a lot of evidence by not
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. It looks like you're muted. Could you perhaps unmute?
How weird.
Here we go.
Sorry
okay.
about that.
All good. All good. Okay. Thank you.
Let's see. How do I get this back again? Stop sharing. I wonder if I just pull this over to the screen.
Yeah.
Oh.
You can.
Can you see it? Can you
Yeah,
still
just
see
make it. You can make it full screen. It's fine. Thank
Okay.
you. Okay. Okay.
Okay. So when did you stop hearing me talk?
Just like 10 seconds ago.
Okay. Okay. Right. Right. So I was just really saying that, one needs to be able to do all this at scale and speed. And human beings' brains aren't big enough, and we don't have enough time to do it. So we need to have automation. So this project was a collaboration with behavioural scientists and computer scientists, and this developed the ontology, and that I will show you, behaviour change intervention ontology, but also developed a prototype of a prediction tool in relation to our first use case, which was smoking cessation. So a policymaker or a practitioner could say, this is my target population, this is my setting, this is what I want to achieve, what behaviour change techniques would you suggest, or put in various parameters, and we had 500 Cochrane RCTs that were all coded and therefore could be automated, but I won't talk about that work today. Okay, and then again, below here is looking at AI in implementation science. Really, really important. Okay, so this is a small part of the upper level of the behaviour change intervention ontology. So you can see behaviour change intervention in this, I can't point to it on screen, but hopefully you can see it under intervention. Now you can just substitute that for implementation intervention, because all of those things are true. So it's got a content. So actually what's in it? What's the active ingredients of change? It's also delivered. How is it delivered? The source, the mode of delivery, the style of delivery, the schedule of delivery. And then on the left hand, tailoring. All of that is very applicable. And important to know that ontology isn't just a taxonomy or a list. It's a complete logical system. So I've talked about the precision, but it also makes implicit assumptions explicit. So it's very good for consensus building. My husband, Robert West, works in the area of addiction when he's not working with me. And addiction is, for example, a very contested word. And some people use it in a more biological sense and some in a more social sense. When you have ontologies as a tool, you can define it however you want, so long as it's precise and you're able to show how your definition links to other definitions. So it really helps, I think, collaborations, because instead of people arguing about what something is or is not, or confused because they don't argue about it, but one person has one thing in their head, another person has another thing in their head, and it's not made explicit. Again, it really holds us back. It also allows, because it has a semantic structure with hierarchies, but also other kinds of relationships, it allows reasoning about concepts and looks to see what combinations are possible or impossible. Okay. So this third one, predicting outcomes of novel scenarios. Another thought I had when I spent 8 years on this Public Health Interventions Advisory Committee as part of NICE, if people know the UK Health Guidance Committee. And what struck me is the vast majority of research we were looking at was from the US. Quite a lot of it was probably undergraduates. But what we were trying to do is have evidence-based recommendations, often for disadvantaged people in healthcare and urban situations that were very different culturally, organisationally from the States. And so it struck me what we need to be able to do is predict from all of that, but to novel scenarios, not just use a meta-analysis and say, well, on average, what does this look like? We want to be able to generalize and specify novel scenarios and make inferences across contexts. I mean, I was mentioned before about this high heterogeneity. What we want is to explain variation across studies and generalize findings to different contexts, because this will make evidence useful and just step up a bit. And I would say in behavioral science, I think in many of the social sciences, we've got lots of theories of how things change, process of change, mechanisms of action, very little theory explaining variation. And I think it's key. If I was starting my career again, I might tackle it, but maybe one of you will. It really needs to be done. Okay, so in this project on the left, here we have our messy evidence growing faster than humans can keep up with. On the right-hand side is what we want. We want up-to-date estimates of the effectiveness of interventions, unpacking the reasons for heterogeneity, and generating new testable hypotheses. How do we do this? An ontology, which is an organizing structure for our data, and using AI, natural language processing, machine learning. One of the ambitions of this project, which ended up about 5 years, I think, was to be able to use natural language processing to automatically extract data from research reports. That was the least successful bit of the project. And collaborator Professor James Thomas, I don't know if any of you know him, from UCL, he's doing some good stuff, pushing that forward in terms of tables and flow diagrams, etc. But that's a whole other talk. Okay, now this is a very overview, bird's eye view, really, of the ontology. So on the left-hand side, you have your intervention, as I said, the content. Think of that as the active ingredients and how those are delivered. On the right-hand side, your outcome, and then the mechanism of action between. Those are moderated by the extent to which that intervention is engaged with, either through reach or exposure, and then also the context, which we define as population, setting, and events. For example, was it pre or post 2020 makes a difference for certain things. You put all of that together with the research study methods, and we have a different ontology we're developing of research study methods, and that then becomes your outcome behaviour value. So the main point is, you need to take all of these things into account together. And the other point is, under every single one of these white boxes here is an ontology of, maybe 200 plus entities and relationships between those entities. So here listed, 12th is still being finished, but all the others, we have ontologies of all these aspects of what we call the intervention scenario. It's all on Welcome Open Research, so you can leave comments there. It's a good, it's kind of Welcome Trust funded us, and basically it's a branded F1000 if anybody's used that publication platform. But more and more, I just want to use these platforms where you post it and it doesn't count as being published until you get 2 or 3 positive reviews, and you can update it, etc. Okay, so just in this talk, I just want to say a little bit about the behaviour change techniques and about mechanisms of action. I'm not going to show you the mechanisms of action ontology, but I am going to show you a tool where you can link behaviour change techniques to kind of high-level mechanisms. And this was work I did before I got involved in ontologies, but there's only so much you can do in one talk. Okay, so that triangle I showed you, this is it looking a bit more ontological. Okay, so you've got, do you see the BCI scenario kind of bottom in the green box, bottom left hand? Ignore the red side. That is the beginnings of our thinking about the ontology of research methods. But we have a BCI scenario, as I said, and then you've got the plan and the report in the solid blue. Oh gosh, it's moving itself on, how weird. And then again, you can probably see you've got the context right below, you've got a temporal context we've now got in there, engagement, you've got the behaviour change interventions and the delivery, techniques, tailoring, etc. So just look up at the techniques bit, and I'm going to show you a bit about the techniques, but what I'm showing you about the techniques is true for every single one of these circles. So there are thousands of entities altogether. It's a labour of love, and I'm at the moment 1 year through a 5-year NIH-funded grant, which is developing tools and resources to make using ontologies easier, because it's quite complicated, but in my view, absolutely necessary. And I think at the end, I do have a QR code for signing up, and we're about to launch next month a community of practice for anybody who's interested in using ontologies to get support, to come to seminars, etc. So do sign up at the end. Okay, right, so here we go, content, the behaviour change techniques. I don't know if you're familiar, some I think will be very familiar, some may not be, but basically the smallest component that is a behaviour change intervention, or is part of. And again, it was me trying to do systematic reviews where I saw all these interventions are being described differently. How do we put them together? It's impossible. You have to drill down into the smallest ingredients and then build up from there, to be precise. This was actually published a long time ago now, and cited more than 8,000 times, just to show that people have found this really helpful to be able to report more precisely their interventions. And the ontology is just a step up from this more limited taxonomy, because all this is a kind of a hierarchy. So the 93 items in 16 groupings. So top left hand, you can see 9 different techniques that are associated with goals and planning. And for each of these, there is a definition, but that's before we knew about ontologies and ontological definitions. So these aren't precise enough for computers to work with. And then we give examples, which is always important. Anybody who's interested, there's a smartphone app, so you can quite easily look these up. Okay, but I call this V1 for a purpose. You know, nothing stands still. All my work is work in progress. And I thought we'd do a V2. And then I discovered about ontologies and that the rest of science is using ontologies. We're not, we need to use it. So we did a lot of work to get feedback in various ways from the literature, from experts, etc., that fed into this. And so the ontology has a logical structure, which means entities can be added. Ontologies are living things. They can be updated. So this community of practice I'm talking about, partly we're looking for people to co-produce useful tools and resources, say what they want, but also people may want to use it, and you know, we've only got the sort of top few levels, but people may want to elaborate in different particular areas. So the original taxonomy is a fixed thing. It's very difficult to add to it. Then, as I said, the relationships between them, definitions, I've talked about it, and this really important thing that they can be revised, added or modified. So we have monthly, we have a GitHub for all of these ontologies. We have on GitHub tracker, and people can say if they don't like something, if they've got a better suggestion. And we have, I think it's monthly, open public meetings where we review those and discuss how we're going to change it. So it's a real collaborative tool to bring the field together and to engage the field. You know, this is just the start of it. So just to show you the 20 high-level classes here, this is just for behavior change techniques. And do you remember how many different upper-level classes? So for behavior change techniques, we have 20. So I'm not going to read these out, but if you just skim your eyes down there, you can see these different groupings. And on the right, you can see the number of behavior change techniques in each of these groupings, just to give you an idea of the range of them. And there's something called Onto Search. So if you go onto the website, and I'll show links at the end, there's a way of searching, but there's also Onto Visualize, which I kind of like. So you actually can visualize and zoom in and zoom out on different bits of the ontology. So here you can see we've just taken a little bit out to show you how it's put together. And actually the relationships between them, there's a lot more that can be done with this. Okay, so just to give you an example, on the left-hand side is what we had in social support was before. We just had three BCTs. I think it was something like instrumental, social, and maybe general or something like that. But now we've got a very precise definition here, and we've got advise to seek support, and then we've got instrumental, emotional, informational appraisal, the same under arrange support and deliver support. So, you know, instead of just saying provide social support, if you read that in a paper, what does that actually mean? And this allows you to drill down into detail, which, as I said before, allows replication, synthesis, implementation, etc. And what I'm saying here is true for all the kinds of concepts and entities that you're interested in implementation science, at whatever level you might be talking about. Okay, so I mentioned about how they're delivered, the behavior, the processes responsible for the change, the moderating of it, and I've already showed you this before, so we can just skip over this. Oh, I see what I'm doing here. Yeah, mechanisms of action there. Do you see in red, there's BCI delivery and mechanism of action. So I wanted to just show them. And I'm going to say something about relating BCTs to theory now. So theories are helpful ways of summarizing what we know and accumulating knowledge about a topic. And as I said, they explain both processes of change and variation. Okay, skip that. So here is a behavior change technique on the left, a behaviour on the right, and the mechanism of action in the beginnings, in the middle. So you want to improve medication adherence. You want to do that because you found out that you want to target this group of things and prompts and cues. So, as I said, this is a bit of work done before ontologies, but I think it's potentially of interest to you. What we looked at was how in the literature do authors talk about how behaviour change techniques are linked with mechanisms of action. And also we had, I think, 100 international experts who did a lot of work looking at them. So this is the URL where it can be found. Now it looks something like this. So here on the left-hand side, you have 60 of the most frequent BCTs. This was a MRC, Medical Research Council funded bit of work. And on the top, we have mechanisms of action. Now, those 26, for anybody who knows the theoretical domains framework, which has 14 domains, includes those 14 domains plus 12 additional, which came from another bit of work I did integrating theories of behaviour change and seeing which were the most frequently used after those top 14. And so for each of these cells that are in different colours, we have a triangulation between what came from the experts, the data that came from the review, and the green is when there's high confidence. There's a link between that behaviour change technique, that mechanism of action. Blue is high confidence that those things aren't linked, yellow inconclusive, and white is no evidence. So if you are wanting, for example, to develop a theory-based intervention, and you have some theoretical mechanisms that you know or have good confidence that that is what you want to target to bring about change, you can then use this to say, okay, if those are the mechanisms I want to target, what are the behaviour change techniques to use to target those interventions? Or if there is a evaluation of an intervention that has not been developed explicitly on theory, and you know what is in the intervention, so you can tell what the techniques are, then you can say, okay, if these were the techniques, what are the likely mechanisms by which this intervention had its effect? So you can use it in both these ways. Okay, and this is now linked to the behaviour change intervention ontology. So those behaviour change techniques and the mechanism of action are all linked. And so there's a way in which you can use that tool and link to the ontology. Okay, finally coming to the end here. Here are some uses of ontologies. Because they are so detailed and comprehensive, they're very good at identifying where are the research gaps, evidence synthesis I've talked about, building models, developing interventions and study protocols. And Robert West, who I mentioned before, he's developed a paper and protocol authoring tool, which is ontology based. And so it comes up with prompts. He's developed it for RCTs and I think also for feasibility studies now. But basically it prompts everything that you need to report in a paper with an ontology underpinning it. And at the end of it, you just put in all the information, press a button, and your paper's written. I mean, obviously, you have to do the introduction and the discussion, flesh it out. But basically, the methods and the findings are there, and it's really good for showing that you haven't missed key things. Because even if you go to the high status journals and you read the highly cited articles, it's shocking how much key information is just missed out. Okay. Oh yes, and integrating theory, that's another whole bit of work that I won't talk about here, but I realised that that we can use it for that also. And we're using AI and machine learning for that also. Okay, so I hope I've got this this message across, because I said it in many different ways. We need this a step change in evidence synthesis, interpretation, and generation of new knowledge. And the other thing, I really has sharpened my thinking, especially representing complexity, which is what we all have to deal with. And it now makes me think deeply about what are these things I'm talking about. Helps inquiry to be coherent and comprehensive. As I said, links evidence and theory, and enables a cumulative science, which we desperately need to move forward at a much faster rate than these last 20 years. And I think this one way is of doing it. However, also challenges, unfamiliarity of language and ways of thinking. So we have both the formal definitions, which can be incredibly clunky because they inherit their sort of parent class, because you don't want to keep repeating at every single level what's been said before. You know, if you're trying to define a table, you don't want to have to say it's a piece of furniture, and a piece of furniture is something that's in a house or whatever, you know. But ontologically, you bring in all these upper levels. Anyway, so it does make it quite clunky. So we always have we try and, as much as possible, have informal definitions. It can reduce, as I say, kind of being economic with how you express things, and subtlety. Needs expertise, and one needs to ensure that when one's using it, one has you know, a lot of iterative reliability, stakeholder feedback, and broad consensus. Okay, so here are some resources: the Human Behaviour-Change Project, and now the APRICOT project, but both are now under this website. Also under that website at the top, actually, you can now get to the ontology. Publications, I said, are all in Welcome Open Research. On YouTube, we've got a webinar series, and then we've also got a foundry of ontologies that are relevant to behavioural and social sciences. And yes, here we go. I've got a QR code, so I'll leave that up for a minute in case you want to. I assume these slides will be shared, so you'll have them afterwards anyway, but do join up and come to the launch next month if you're interested. And acknowledgements, Wellcome Trust and Behavioural Research UK and the NIH have also contributed to some of this work. Thank you, and sorry I probably took too long there. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Professor Michie. That was terrific. We have time for the Q&A now. We'll take about 15 minutes, if that's all right. So please post any of your questions in the Q&A section of the chat, and I will go through them as they come in. So first, maybe while we wait for some additional questions to come in, I want to know, essentially, right, Susan, you were a visionary in introducing AI to the intersection of behavioral and implementation sciences. And as you highlighted in your work, you know, that's from, you know, almost more than a decade ago now that this work started. So I want to know your perspective as you notice the rise of generative AI over the last few years, you know, your thinking around ontologies. Did that shift your thinking in any way, make it evolve and see for additional opportunities as well?
It's a really interesting question, because I mean, generative AI, you know, because it's looking at predicting language, you know, doesn't inherently have semantic structure. The extent to which it can work with it and reason with it, I don't know. I think that's a very, very interesting question. I mean, we you know, in our predictive tool, we used machine learning to do that. But the computer scientist who's still collaborating with us on the APRICOT project, Dr. Jana Hastings, who's based in Switzerland, she's fantastic. And you know, if you want a future webinar, and she does do work in the space of implementation on more the AI side of things, she should definitely be the person who could actually answer with any authority. You know, I can kind of spot ideas and things that need to happen and go and find people who know about things. But it's yeah, in terms of the nitty gritty of, you know, what generative AI could do in this space, I couldn't hazard a guess.
Still to be explored. Excellent, thank you. Professor Anne Spinewine is asking, I'd like to know whether and how often and if the theory and techniques tool is updated or will be updated.
Ah, that's a good question. So all we've done is link it with the ontologies at the moment, because it was a 3-year grant. If you think of the amount of time to both do the expert consensus work and the literature work, and 60 BCTs times 28 mechanisms of action, that's a lot. I think Marta Marquez, who's another collaborator on the co-investigator on the APRICOT project, who's based in Portugal, I know it's on her list of things she wants to have a think about doing, and again, seeing if we can use AI in this space to do it. But if anybody's got any ideas or any interest, please do email me. And if you just search my name under UCL, you'll get my email, because yeah, it would be quite exciting if we could think of a way of doing that didn't mean all that laborious work we did previously.
Thank you. Kia Kramer is asking, you mentioned that the ontology approach accounts for variation in how terms are defined, since individuals define terms within a given context. It seems this could also make the approach more sensitive to cultural differences across interventionists and across target populations. Have you observed this in practice?
Yeah, well, I mean, for example, I talked about, I'm currently doing this work integrating theories of behavior change, which should be completed at the end of this year using AI, trying to help with it. But the reason for doing that is because I did a review many years ago about theories of behavior change with a very kind of quite a tight definition theory and of behavior. And it produced 78. And I thought, like, what are we going to do with all of this? And people, you know, it's not helpful because, you know, they're very overlapping. There's none of them are very few of them are really comprehensive, unless you get very simple, like the combi model. And so I'm trying to integrate those at the moment, see how we go. But to give an example, I had economists, sociologists, anthropologists, and psychologists on that steering group. And it hadn't crossed my mind that the word behavior would be a problem. This is one kind of cultural difference, but it was a massive problem. And so I said, okay, what words do you use? And so the anthropologist said, we use habitus. And the sociologist said, well, we use social practices. And, you know, fine words and fine concepts, and they all have their nuances. But if we were going to make progress, we had to agree on a word and then agree on a definition, which we did in that paper, and then a book that we produced from it. And we all worked to get a definition that we could all be comfortable with. Now, that's just about trying to get a consensus definition. And if we'd done it in terms of ontology, it would probably be more precise than it is. In fact, it probably is, because we've got that definition still, and we've got a definition of behavior in our ontology, which would have then enabled kind of it to be more used across cultures. But you may be talking about culture that's not cultural differences within academia, but cultural differences within different kinds of populations. And the same thing applies. And, you know, people will use different terms, completely different language, and also use different concepts. I think when you know, we've been hearing a lot about Greenland, haven't we, recently? And I think people who live in Greenland have got something like 20 different terms for snow, types of snow, you know, which we wouldn't even be aware of, that there are so many different types. So all of these things, if they can be defined in this sort of ontological way, it means that we can know exactly what they are and how they relate to other definitions. So it's a way of encapsulating in formal terms and with formal logical relations the term, the constructs, the entities, the concepts that people are using, whatever their cultures. So I don't know if that's kind of clear, but I think it can really help with showing differences between different sorts of terms, sometimes the same thing or different things.
Indeed. John O'Neill is asking, will the APRICOT community of practice be a place where people with different levels of AI knowledge can still connect and get practical information to adopt some new methods in their work?
Okay, so the community of practice is not primarily about AI, it's primarily about tools and resources for using ontologies. But we are, and all my work is always trying to be a resource for the research community. So if a group of people come along who want to specifically talk about AI, then Jana would be the person who could host meetings about that. And actually, Robert and me are working with a fantastic group in Japan, Godot. They're actually a AI company who are using all of our ontology to do amazing kind of predictions and tools in the work they do with various clients. And I know that they're keen to be involved in the community of practice. So I think we will, but we'll be very much responding to what people are interested in or want.
Excellent. Olivia, a PhD student from Carleton University, is saying, what would you say is the first step or best approach to begin incorporating reporting ontologies into our research outputs, both peer-reviewed publications and less formal knowledge products? Given that consistent reporting could improve opportunities for machine learning, evidence synthesis, how should research teams begin operationalizing this in practice?
Well, I suppose one thing is to find out about them, and maybe if you go into Welcome Open Research, it's called the Human Behaviour-Change Project Gateway. There's an upper level. There's an article which is just about the upper level of ontologies. That might be a good paper to start with. YouTube, the YouTube series, just picking out ones that might be useful there. And one thing is that you don't need to use everything, and you don't need to go to the lower level intricate classes. You could, start at the upper level ones. So I think it depends what you're wanting to represent. I mean, if you want to represent a paper, all of it ontologically, then you could try using the paper authoring tool and contact Robert West. So I think if you go onto the Human Behaviour-Change Project website, you should be able to get in touch with him that way, or just do Robert West UCL and you'll find him, because I think one person so far has done their whole intervention ontologically, but the idea would be then that you can link that up with data, etc. So it's quite a generic question, so I'm not being very helpful in answering it. But don't think you have to do everything. So for example, you might just want to do techniques and modes of delivery, or you might just want to do setting and population, which are very generic. But I think the best thing is to go and have a look at it using, if you go onto the website, you can look at the search tool. And there's also something called Ontology Lookup Service, which is quite a good one. So, if you've got a term that you want to say, is there an ontology definition of this? You can go onto that, and a lot of all of our ontology terms will be in there. But sometimes you get several, because sometimes different ontologies have different ones.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have time maybe for a few additional questions, so please leave them in the Q&A section. While we wait for some additional questions, so I want to ask maybe at a very high level, of course, you talked about the behavior change technique taxonomy and then the behavior change technique ontology. So maybe if you could discuss some of the changes or made refinements between the first version and the second version, or like some changes between BCT groups or specific BCTs that were added or removed. Just I think it would be interesting to walk us
Yeah,
through a little bit of that process.
sure. So when we generated the 93 from the literature, that was for the literature we looked at, that's all we generated. I think we're up to 240 or something. So it's much more extensive, partly because it's covering more ground, because obviously the more it's used, the more people identify new ones, and partly because, as I showed with the social support technique, it's more elaborated, so it's more precise. When we, identified the 93, we thought people can't work with just a list of 93 things. So this is where we thought we need to have some kind of hierarchy. And what we did there was have a card sort test where we asked people what behavior change techniques would go together in various ways. And so we generated this way of categorizing them, but it wasn't using logic or theory. It was very much a kind of how do people think about this, because that's what's going to help them in terms of putting them together. So in terms of science, in terms of pragmatism, it's helpful. In terms of science, a bit weak. Whereas the ontology, as I said, it's much more extensive, but the way in which the techniques are organized are much more logically driven, and the relationships between techniques are much better specified. Before, it was just a list without specifying any relationships between them. And of course, the definitions are now precise enough to be computer readable.
Excellent. And for someone, so we've applied in our work the behavior change technique ontology. We picked one to start, and then to your earlier point, we, I think at one point, used the higher groupings, right? I think there are 20 higher groupings. So I think even those, there's a lot of granularity below, but I think even working with those is extremely helpful.
Well, that's right. You can use the terms at all different levels of a hierarchy. So one might be quite a high level one, and one might be more granular, depending on what it is you're looking at. Yeah.
Excellent. So let's take maybe a final question. So Zoe Lim is asking, would you recommend using the theory and technique tool alone to identify BCTs or mechanisms of actions, or should that be used in combination with specific TMFs?
Well, with everything, one's got to start with one's objective. Whatever one's doing, whatever one's thinking about, whatever one's doing, always start why. What am I trying to do here? So with the theory and techniques tool, this was developed because everybody kept saying, because funding bodies suddenly woke up to theory in the UK. I don't know what it's like in Canada. And so everybody would say in the introduction, my intervention's going to be based on X theory. Then you'd hear nothing about it again until the discussion. And then it says, and so that shows partial support for X theory. Like, this is not how to do science. This is not how to move forward. And so it was that kind of poor practice that made me think about, okay, well, actually, there's another bit of work I did, which was defining what do you mean by theory-based. And I think there's a checklist of, it's the theory coding scheme, I think 19 different items. But this was to help authors to really think through how the techniques and the theories are linked together. So it's not trying to be any coherent theory at all, but really theories are a set of theoretical propositions. You can't just test a theory. What you test is theoretical propositions within a theory. And so within any theory or model or framework that you're interested in, there may be theoretical propositions there that it will be helpful to then see, okay, for those theoretical propositions, which are the techniques that are hypothesized, not definitely going to, but hypothesized by experts in the literature and in this expert consensus exercise that are likely to be the ones that will change those identified theoretical mechanisms. So I don't know if that's helpful. I mean, we could have a whole seminar about, you know, what is a theory, model, and framework, how do we use them, etc. But with a lot of these things, it's really important, whether it's the theoretical domains framework or ontologies or the theory and techniques tool, these are tools. They're tools to help thinking and to help practice and to try and advance science. Nothing is a tablet of stone. Everything should be moving forward and changing. But I would say always just think about, what am I using? And in fact, your paper was very good in this way. Start off with, what am I using it for? And, you know, what are the options? And, you know, select things on that basis. But I think some of what I've talked about today is generic. Whatever you're doing, be very precise about what you're talking about. Ensure that it, you know, what it can link with other bodies of data or evidence, and that you can communicate it in a way that on the one hand, everybody can understand, but on the other hand, computers can understand too. And that's where having this idea of being very specific and precise, which definitely entails very clunky language, but matched with a kind of informal definition, I think is a way of going forward. So don't ever think, you know, there's only one way forward for anything. Different horses for different courses, as we say.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated how you showcased how ontologies can be used prospectively as well as retrospectively, I guess, as part of evidence synthesis and coding of intervention content and mode of delivery and so on. I think to me it'll be interesting to see, having applied some of the tools, one of the key limitations, and I expect you also brought that up as part of your talk, that the natural language processing, there are some challenges potentially looking at coding, right, automatically or manually intervention reports, often to me because of lack of specificity in the reporting and lack of transparency or structure. So I hope that we can, you know, use more and more of those tools prospectively to, but I guess the other question, the other point I would like to bring up is the need to I don't know how that could feed into the guidance around publication, right, and around those different journals, and how you kind of need to structure, let's say, in a way, your reporting. I don't know if you had some discussions about that with some key journals, but I think
well, on the first one, just about automated data extraction, which is, you know, really needed in this area. I'm talking to 3 different groups who are all trying to do this in different ways. I'm actually bringing them together in the next couple of months, you know, all off the starting block. But this is something we could bring into the community of practice. So anybody who's doing work in this area, just get in touch. On the issue about journals, when Robert West was editor-in-chief of Addiction Journal, he began trying to, you know, get this idea that people should be really specifying precisely all their interventions and doing this. But then he retired and somebody else has taken on, so that's not moved forward. But I think there's the editor of Nicotine and Tobacco Research is trying to do something similar. I mean, in the end, I mean, at the moment, I think it's such an inefficient way, isn't it? We have data, we analyze data, we then put it into words quite clumsily. We then put it into PDF, which is impossible for computers to read. We then try and extract that information back again into something that computers can work with. So what we need to do, and this is my vision of the way forward, is cut out the middle person, the paper. Let's have annotated, ontologized data sets with a paper that is just explaining everything beside it. And so you're your main thing we have scientifically is the annotated and explained data sets that we can then link with other data sets, etc., rather than this ludicrous process of going from data to words back to data again. You know, A, it's massively time wasting and inefficient, and B, we lose a lot of knowledge that way along the way, you know.
That's such a fantastic
That's a little
point.
rant, sorry.
Well, that would make for a fantastic editorial, you know, from data to words to data or something like that. I think I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whenever I give talks, I hope I get people thinking and connecting, you know, and you know, anybody who's got inspired to do an editorial or anything like that, and wants me to review anything or input or whatever, just let me know. Because, you know, we're all in it together and we all have the same motive to try and push things forward.
Fabulous. Well, thanks again, Professor Michie, for the time, for the talk, for the excellent talk, to everyone for joining today. This is the first of 4 seminars this year. The next one is going to be with Professor Annie Leblanc, who's a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Integration into Practice, Knowledge Mobilization, and also the Director of the National Patient-Oriented Training Entity. And she's going to talk about fitting interventions to context. So building on what we discussed. Thank you, everyone. And we'll post a recording of the seminar online as well. Thank you, Professor Michie.
And thank you for all those questions and good discussion. Thank you. Bye.